1931. Gauley Bridge, West Virginia. Dewey Flack was 17, maybe 18 years old. He came from the South, looking for work during the Great Depression. He found a job drilling a tunnel through Gauley Mountain. The pay was decent, 50 cents an hour, sometimes 40, sometimes 30. The company kept cutting wages, but work was work. Dewey entered the tunnel in early 1931. 2 weeks after his last shift, on May 20th, 1931, he was dead. His death certificate said pneumonia. It was a lie. Dewey died from acute silicosis. His lungs were filled with silica dust. The rock inside the tunnel was 99.4% pure silica. When workers drilled through it without water spray, the dust filled the air. White clouds so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Workers breathed it in with every breath. The silica sliced through lung tissue like shards of glass. Within months, young, healthy men began suffocating. Their lungs hardened, filled with nodules, unable to absorb oxygen. They lost weight, couldn't breathe, couldn't walk, and they died. Official company death toll: 109 workers. Congressional hearing in 1936, 476 deaths. Modern epidemiological studies, 764 to over 1,000 deaths. The true number may never be known because the company buried victims secretly at night in unmarked mass graves with scrap metal crosses. Bodies stacked like cordwood in the back of trucks. Families were never notified. When relatives inquired, they were told their loved ones had moved on to other work sites, other states. The truth was, they were dead, buried in a field in Somersville, forgotten. 3/4 of the workers were black migrants from the South. They came to West Virginia hoping for a better life. They called it the Promised Land. Instead, they found a hellhole, and most of them never left. This is the story of Hawk's Nest Tunnel, the deadliest industrial disaster in American history, and the cover-up that lasted decades. The New River flows through West Virginia's Appalachian Mountains. For millions of years, it carved deep gorges through the landscape. In the 1920s, Union Carbide Corporation saw an opportunity. The company wanted to build a hydroelectric power plant near Gauley Bridge. The plant would generate electricity for Union Carbide's electrometallurgical operations, producing ferroalloys, steel additives. The company needed massive amounts of cheap power. The New River could provide it, but there was a problem. The natural course of the New River didn't flow directly to the planned power plant site. Union Carbide needed to divert the river. The solution was a tunnel, 3.8 miles long, drilled straight through Gauley Mountain. The tunnel would redirect the river's flow, dropping it over 800 feet to turbines at the power plant. It was an ambitious project, and it would require thousands of workers. In 1927, Union Carbide created a subsidiary, The new Kanawha Power Company. The company hired Rinehart Dennis Company as the contractor. Construction was scheduled to begin in 1930. The timing was perfect. The Great Depression had just begun. Unemployment was soaring. Men were desperate for work. Thousands applied. Most were poor. Many were black migrants from the South. They fled racial violence, Jim Crow laws, economic devastation. West Virginia represented hope, a chance to earn money, feed their families, build a future. The company recruited aggressively. They promised good wages, steady work, housing. They didn't mention the dangers, because at first, no one knew. The tunnel hadn't been drilled yet, the rock hadn't been tested, and the company hadn't decided whether to prioritize worker safety or profit. When the choice came, they chose profit. Construction began in 1930. Approximately 5,000 men worked on the project over 15 months. About 3,000 worked inside the tunnel. The rest worked on the surface, building the power plant, installing equipment, creating infrastructure. But the tunnel itself was where the real work happened, and where the real danger lurked. Workers drilled holes into the rock using pneumatic drills. Then they packed the holes with dynamite, blasted, removed the rubble, and repeated, day after day, shift after shift. The tunnel advanced slowly through solid rock, and as they drilled deeper, they discovered something. The rock was almost pure silica, 99.4% in some sections. This was unusual, and it was valuable. Silica had commercial uses. Union Carbide realized they could mine the silica as a byproduct, sell it for profit. But there was a problem. Silica dust is deadly. By the 1930s, silicosis was a well-known occupational disease. Miners, stonecutters, quarry workers, anyone who breathed silica dust over long periods developed lung disease. It was slow, progressive, incurable. Workers typically took 20 to 30 years to die, but that was from low-level exposure. Hawk's Nest was different. The silica concentration was extreme, and Rinehart Dennis Company made a decision. They would use dry drilling, no water spray. Water spray suppresses dust, keeps it from becoming airborne, but it also slows down drilling, increases costs. The company wanted speed, so they drilled dry. The result was catastrophic. White dust filled the tunnel. Clouds so thick, workers described it as a ghostly fog. You couldn't see the person next to you, couldn't see the walls, couldn't see anything, just white. And with every breath, silica particles entered workers' lungs, microscopic shards, slicing lung tissue, triggering inflammation, forming nodules, hardening, suffocating. Within 2 months of entering the tunnel, workers began collapsing. Young men, healthy, strong, suddenly unable to breathe, unable to work. They lost weight rapidly, 70, 80, 100 pounds. Their skin turned gray, They coughed constantly, spat blood, and they died. Fast. Some within 6 months, others within a year. This wasn't normal silicosis. This was acute silicosis, and it was killing them faster than anyone had ever seen. One worker testified in a 1936 newsreel. Each and every day I worked in that tunnel, I helped carry off 10 to 14 men who was overcome by the dust. 10 to 14 men every single day. The company knew, supervisors knew, engineers knew, but they kept drilling. They kept sending men into the tunnel, and they kept watching them die. Masks were available, but only for inspectors, only for company managers. Workers weren't given masks. They weren't given water spray. They weren't given any protection. When they asked for masks, they were told no. When they complained about the dust, they were told to keep working or leave. And for men who had traveled hundreds of miles, who had families depending on them, leaving wasn't an option. So they stayed, and they breathed the dust, and they died.
The town of Gauley Bridge earned a nickname, the town of the living dead, because everywhere you looked, there were sick workers, men covered in white silica dust, ghostly figures, shuffling through town, too weak to work, too poor to leave, waiting to die. Local doctors had never seen anything like it. Young, healthy men breaking down in months, profoundly short of breath, severe weight loss, unable to move, unable to function. Some doctors didn't know what was happening. Others knew, but were paid to stay silent. Company doctors labeled the deaths as pneumonia, or tuberculosis, or a made-up disease they called tunnelitis. Anything but silicosis, because if they admitted workers were dying from silicosis, Union Carbide would be liable. Lawsuits would follow, compensation claims, negative publicity. So the company lied. They falsified death certificates. They pressured doctors, and they buried the bodies as fast as possible. Emma Jones lived in Fayette County. Her husband Charles worked in the tunnel. So did her 3 sons and her brother. By 1936, the 3 sons were dead. The brother was dead, and Charles was dying. He had lost so much strength that his handshake was as weak as a kitten's, according to a Pittsburgh Press reporter. Emma testified before a Congressional Labor Subcommittee in 1936. She told them everything: the dust, the deaths, the lies. Her testimony helped expose the disaster, but it didn't bring her sons back. George Houston was 23 years old. He worked in the tunnel for 48 weeks. He developed acute silicosis, struggled to breathe, seemed near death. His hourly wage was 50 cents. The company cut it to 40 cents, then 30 cents. As he got sicker, they paid him less. Nurse Alma Allen testified that George died shortly after. The company did not wish an autopsy performed, she said, because it would have uncovered the cause of death: silicosis. Sam and John Ward were brothers. They came from Kings Mountain, North Carolina. Both worked in the tunnel. Sam died on February 15, 1933. He was buried in a hillside cemetery near Gauley Bridge. It's uncertain whether his family received any compensation. John survived, but was sick for years. Whether he made it home is unknown. Records for black workers are scarce. Many simply disappeared from history.
George Robinson worked as a miner before joining the tunnel crew. He testified during the 1936 Congressional hearings. He described how black workers were assigned the most dangerous tasks, how they worked longer hours, how they died in greater numbers. His testimony provided much of what we know about the treatment of black workers. He became a key figure in Muriel Rukeyser's poem cycle, The Book of the Dead. Rukeyser visited Gauley Bridge in 1936. She interviewed surviving workers and families of the dead. Her poems captured the horror, the injustice, the grief. The bodies kept piling up. Most of the dead were black. Only a few local cemeteries accepted black corpses. Once those cemeteries filled, a local undertaker began transporting bodies to a field in Somersville. They arrived stacked like cordwood in the open bed of a truck, then dropped in unmarked graves. No coffins, just canvas bags. No grave markers, no notifications to families. When concerned relatives back home inquired, they were told their loved ones had moved on. It was a lie. They were buried, forgotten, erased from history. By the time the tunnel was completed in 1931, hundreds were already dead. Hundreds more would die in the years that followed. Silicosis doesn't go away. Once the damage is done, it's permanent. Workers who left the tunnel sick died slowly over the next decade. In different states, different towns. They were never counted in the official death toll, never compensated, never remembered. In 1933, lawsuits began. Cora Jones lost 3 sons, and her husband was sick. She sued. Others followed. By 1936, 542 lawsuits had been filed. The company settled most for pennies, $30, $50, $80, for a life, for a son, for a husband. It was an insult, but for desperate families, it was all they would ever get. The Congressional hearings in 1936 exposed the disaster nationally. Newspapers covered it. Outrage followed. But Union Carbide escaped criminal charges. The new Kanawha Power Company, the subsidiary that built the tunnel, dissolved in 1934, right after the tunnel was completed. It was a legal maneuver. Dissolving the company limited liability. Union Carbide distanced itself from responsibility, and no one was ever held criminally accountable.
The tunnel was completed in 1931. It worked exactly as designed. The new river was diverted. Water flowed through the 3.8-mile tunnel, dropped 800 feet, spun turbines, generated electricity. Union Carbide's power plant operated successfully for decades. The company profited enormously, and the workers who built it were forgotten. The official company death toll remained at 109. For years, that was the accepted number. But everyone who lived in Gauley Bridge knew it was false. They had seen the bodies. They had buried the dead. They knew hundreds had died. But without records, without documentation, without autopsies, the truth couldn't be proven. Until decades later. In 1986, epidemiologist Martin Cherniak published a book, The Hawk's Nest Incident, America's Worst Industrial Disaster. Cherniak studied death certificates, hospital records, congressional testimony, census data. He estimated at least 764 workers died from silicosis related to Hawk's Nest Tunnel. Other studies suggested the number could be close to 1,000 or higher. The true toll may never be known because so many workers left sick and died elsewhere, because so many deaths were misdiagnosed, because so many bodies were buried without records. In 2002, a memorial was erected near the tunnel entrance. It lists 41 names, a fraction of those killed. The inscription reads, "This memorial honors an estimated 764 tunnel workers who died from mining a 3.8-mile tunnel through Gauley Mountain." The memorial acknowledges what the company never did, that hundreds died, that they were forgotten, and that they deserved to be remembered. The Hawk's Nest Tunnel disaster became a turning point in American labor history. The 1936 Congressional hearings led to workplace safety reforms. Silicosis was officially recognized as an occupational disease. Workers' compensation laws expanded. Federal regulations on dust exposure were created. The disaster couldn't be hidden anymore, and it couldn't be ignored. But the changes came too late for the men who died at Hawk's Nest, and for their families. West Virginia passed a workers' compensation law for silicosis victims in 1935, but the law required workers to prove they had worked for at least 2 years on such a project. Most Hawk's Nest workers died in less than a year. Some didn't even last a month. They didn't qualify. There was then, and there is now, no remedy, said Judith Greenwood, Director of Research for the State Workers' Compensation Fund. The disaster also exposed the racial injustice embedded in American industry. 3/4 of the workers were black. They were deliberately hired because they were vulnerable. They had no legal recourse, no unions, no political power. They could be exploited, and when they died, they could be erased. Their deaths were undercounted, their graves unmarked, their names forgotten. It was systemic racism, industrial capitalism, and mass death, all intertwined. Union Carbide continued operating for decades. The company became one of the largest chemical corporations in the world. In 1984, Union Carbide's pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, leaked toxic gas. Over 15,000 people died. Thousands more were injured. It was one of the worst industrial disasters in history. Union Carbide's pattern of prioritizing profit over safety had continued, and people kept dying. The Hawk's Nest Tunnel still exists. It still diverts the New River. It still generates power. You can visit the area, see the memorial, read the names, but you can't see the tunnel. It's closed to the public, sealed, like the history itself, hidden, forgotten, until recently. In the last 2 decades, historians have worked to recover the story, to find the names of the dead, to document their lives. A website, Hawks Nest Names, lists partial names. Researchers continue searching death certificates, census records, anything that might reveal who these men were. It's slow work and incomplete, but it's important because these men deserve to be remembered, not as statistics, but as people, with names, with families, with lives cut short.
The Hawks Nest Tunnel disaster killed at least 764 workers, possibly over 1,000. The company buried them in secret, falsified their death certificates, and erased them from history. For decades, this was America's worst industrial disaster, and almost no one knew about it. Because the victims were poor, because they were black, because they were expendable. But here's the uncomfortable truth. This wasn't an accident. It was a choice. The company knew the rock was pure silica. They knew silica dust was deadly. They knew water spray would prevent it, and they chose not to use it. They chose speed over safety, profit over lives. And when workers started dying, they chose cover-up over accountability. 764 deaths, and no one went to jail. No one was charged. The company dissolved its subsidiary and walked away. If you want to uncover more stories of American infrastructure hiding dark secrets, subscribe to Hidden America. Next time, we'll explore the St. Francis Dam collapse in California, where William Mulholland's Peregrines killed over 400 people in 1928. We'll investigate the ignored warnings, the unstable foundation, and why Mulholland took full responsibility but faced no criminal charges. Subscribe now for more hidden infrastructure stories. And remember, the Hawks Nest Tunnel is still there, still generating power, still operational, built on the graves of over 700 men, whose names we're only now beginning to learn.